Joe Posnanski, welcome to the Bookshelf Conversations.
Great to be here, Ron.
First of all, I want to let everybody know that they're doing some construction outside of my house, so I have no control over whatever thumps and thuds and drilling noises are going to be. Hopefully, it won't be too intrusive.
That's good because I might have a dog walk in at any point and start barking.
Oh,
So
I locked all my animals out of here because I know they will do that. First of all, congratulations on the new book. This just came out, correct?
came out just 2 days ago. Yes.
2 days ago. First of all, as a lot of people who follow my blog know, I have the hair on the back of my neck stands up when the title of the book includes things like best, complete,
Yeah.
ultimate. Yours is beautifully simple. The baseball 100. That's it. No subtitle, no explanation, no nothing. And so kudos for that. So let's start with the title. How much thought went into just those three words?
A lot, but it's an interesting thing. It sort of was the first thought that I had. You know this, you're around this all the time, and you've been in this situation yourself. Titles are hard, every book that I've had an original title, and then I've a working title, and then you go to a different title. And it's so hard to capture the simplicity of what you want to say. My last book was about Harry Houdini, and I ended up with the life and afterlife of Harry Houdini, which I like. I think it has a nice rhythm to it, but it's long and bulky. This one, in my mind, I thought of it as the baseball 100 the entire time. When I first started thinking, oh, okay, what's this going to be? It's going to be the baseball 100. It's the 100 greatest players in baseball history. It's the baseball 100. And that was the working title. And then it's when it was time to actually turn it into a book, it was like, well, it's all I've ever known it as, is the baseball 100. And they did such a beautiful job with the cover, as you pointed out. I mean, it's so simple. It's so classic. You got the little baseball on there, and I think it works. I really think it turned out great.
Now, these essay stories are all pulled from a series you did on The Athletic. Now, how long ago were these original stories done?
So, well, that's a more complicated question than it should be, because I did my first version of the baseball 100 a decade ago on my blog, and I counted down the 100 greatest players, and it was a whole different idea, but it ended up turning into this massive project that sort of overwhelmed my life to the point where I couldn't finish it. I never finished it. I got to number 30. And many of the essays in this book started with that one. I mean, certainly for the first 70 or so players. I did it again. I started it up again a few years later in a whole different format, and again wrote a bunch of them, but did not get to the end. And a bunch of those essays are in this book. And then I did do it for The Athletic at the start of I guess 2020. So it actually started on New Year's Day 2020, and it was supposed to end on opening day. It was going to be 100 essays in 100 days, but then the pandemic hit, and that kind of stretched things out. So they're all about 18 months old, but even those essays, so those essays took from the second version of essays, which took from the first version of essays, and then even those essays have been rewritten and reworked for this book. So it's about four different starts and stops on each of these essays.
Now, you are a relatively young man.
Thank you.
We know that there are. I done a very informal calculation, and of the 100 players in the book, 49 are from what I would call the pre-expansion era, 41 are from the post-expansion era, 9 are from the Negro Leagues, and you just have Sadaharu O from Japan included. Obviously, there's no way you could have seen in person
Right.
the Negro League players.
Of course not.
I imagine there are many of the pre-expansion, and I was very loose with that because if someone started his career in, say, the 1950s and played until the mid-70s, like Mickey Mantle, let's say, I would include him in the pre-expansion era.
Sure.
So what is it like writing about people that you have never seen?
It's a great question. I mean, and you're right. The majority of players in this book I never saw, and even some of the players that I did see, as you point out, and I'm even too young to have seen Mickey Mantle play at all. But I did see Willie Mays and I did see Hank Aaron, but I saw him at the end. I didn't, and I never saw them live. Live, I've seen more than a third, but less than a half of these players, and it is something to try to recapture these players that you never saw. Obviously going back to Walter Johnson and Kid Nichols and Babe Ruth and guys like that I clearly never saw, but also, like I said, players from the 50s and 60s that people have seen that I'm just too young to have seen. So I relied obviously on a lot of firsthand accounts, newspapers, and interviews with a lot of those people, even though I never saw Mickey Mantle play. I did talk to Mickey Mantle, even though I never saw Willie Mays play. I did talk to Willie Mays, even though I never saw Al Kaline play, that kind of thing. And then just a lot of firsthand accounts from people that I've talked to through the years that, the hearing Billy Williams talk about what it was like to face Bob Gibson, hearing from Dusty Baker about what it was like to be Hank Aaron's teammate, things like that. So it's definitely a puzzle, trying to piece together who these people were, and I hope it comes across, because obviously it's done with a great amount of love and admiration for these players.
Do you happen to have a copy of your book with you?
I did bring one right here.
Yeah, very good. I would ask you if you wouldn't mind to read page 655,
Sure. Because
I think that really blends into what we're talking about here.
I marked it here. Here we go. Sometimes I play this game and imagine what it would be like if I was one of only a few people in America who got to see Mark McGwire hit baseballs from 1996 to 2000. The question, how would I tell that story? Forget the records. Nobody's keeping records. Forget the numbers. There are no numbers, or at least no numbers anybody trusts. Forget the PED part. Nobody cares enough to even look. Forget everything. There is no video footage. There are no newspaper stories. There are only a handful of grainy posed photographs that show nothing at all except that someone named Mark McGwire once existed. How would I tell that story? Or more to the point, how would I tell that story so that you believed me? Would I try to tell you how he routinely hit the longest home runs that anyone had ever seen? These home runs were like optical illusions. Those baseballs would go to parts of stadiums nobody had ever hit before. Would you believe me? Wouldn't you just say, well then, how come I never heard of him?
And that is the introduction to the chapter on Josh Gibson, one of those Negro League players that we talked about. And that's one of the things I wondered about when I heard that Major League Baseball was going to incorporate the Negro Leagues into its official record. There don't seem to be official records for that. And it seems that with the older players, again, that you haven't seen, the chapters relied more on stories,
Sure.
and the later players, more recent ones, you have Jeff Bagwell and people of that generation, shall we say. I won't say rely more on stats, but there seem to be more stats in them because we have those stats.
Right. No, that's 100% right. And it's true that even though baseball, more than any other sport, has chronicled its heroes with numbers, so we have amazing numbers for Babe Ruth or for Walter Johnson or for a guy as far back as Honus Wagner, they're not the numbers that we have today. I mean, the numbers that we have today, offensive numbers, defensive numbers, pitching numbers. I mean, we know the spin rate of their curveballs, right? I mean, it is different. We do have so much more information, but I don't know that having all that much more information gets us any closer to what makes the player great. I think we can use those things. I do love the Vince Scully line about stats and that some people use stats the way a drunk uses a light post to hold him up rather than for enlightenment. And I think that's true. I love the new stats. I love what they can tell us about the players, but they can only tell us so much. And so for me, this definitely is a book of stories.
Do you think there's a tendency to, for lack of a better word, romanticize older players? Because, like you say, we can see all the ESPN, all the MLB network, we can see video of them making these plays and from on a daily basis. And as you say, that you're talking about the grainy photos being the only thing we have left from the Negro Leagues. There are very few, if any, newsreel footages of Negro League players. We can always watch that famous clip of Willie Mays and the catch. But do you think there's something about romanticizing somebody like a Walter Johnson or Chrissy Mathewson?
No question about it. But I the one I think about all the time is the Babe Ruth called shot in the 1930 World Series, right? If we had today's coverage of that game, we would have 100 angles of that home run. And we would have talked to every single player on both of those teams about whether he really called the shot, whether he didn't call the shot. What did he say? What did he actually say? You'd have disagreements. The catcher would say, it was nonsense. And Ruth would say this and that. And we wouldn't be able to romanticize it. I mean, we talk about it. I mean, it would still be a key thing, but there'd be no romance to it. So yes, but the interesting thing to me about baseball is we don't do those same things in other sports. We don't really romanticize Sid Luckman or Sammy Baugh in football. We don't really romanticize Bob Cousy in basketball. I mean, we talk about them still, and we, historians of the games talk about them still, but nobody puts them at the top of the list the way that we do with Walter Johnson, the way we do with Babe Ruth, the way we do with Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, and Hank Greenberg, and so on. So there is something about baseball too that I think adds to that romance, and we can find little pieces of that romance still. I mean, there's definitely a lot of romance around Derek Jeter, even though I think I write this in the book. I think he's the most seen player in baseball history because he was in the playoffs every year at a time that we watched every single game, and so on and so on. There's still romance there, but it is not the same as the romance of the old days, for sure.
I'm glad you brought up Babe Ruth, because in your chapter on Ruth, you have a bunch of different snippets from articles written by different reporters covering it, and some say this, some say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, consensus is very strange. Also, you bring up the point about we don't romanticize other sports. I wonder if that has to do with baseball being a summer game, and we're nostalgic over summer thoughts more than fall and winter thoughts because we're outdoors in the sunshine, the warmth. Basketball is an indoor sport. Hockey is an indoor sport. Football is played in they make a big deal about how macho it is to play football in, the freezing cold, the ice ball, things like that. So I wonder if that's not part of the deal, is that we romanticize about summers.
I got to tell you, that is a great thought, and not one that I've had. But I think you're 100% right. We romanticize summer songs. We romanticize summer movies. I mean, you are 100% right. I think connecting it to summer. I will add, though, that I didn't bring up hockey. I do think that hockey has romance for the older players. Now, you can go back to like maybe the early Eddie Shore days or something, maybe not. But for people like Bobby Hull and Bobby Orr, they're a little more recent. But still, guys from the 50s and 60s, there is romance because the game was so much more, I guess, violent and there's a certain romance to guys playing without helmets and broken noses and all that. So hockey is a little bit more romantic for some of the older players. There is romance certainly in football for John Unitas and guys like that, but it's not the same as it is in baseball. And I really, really love this summer idea. I think there's a lot to that.
One of the things I noticed when I was going through the book, and I don't want to try to do as few spoilers as possible here. When it came time for the chapter on Jackie Robinson, that was chapter 42.
Yeah.
And his uniform number was 42.
Yes.
And then the next chapter is Tom Seaver, because you're counting down. So Tom Seaver's 41. His number was 41. And
Yeah.
then when we get to Mike Schmidt and
Frank Robinson.
Frank Robinson, they were number 20.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh boy, I caught this. And I wonder if anybody else is going to catch it. And then later on, you reveal not so much your methodology, but you do point out that a lot of the players' chapters had significance as to their ranking.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was important to me. And it has proven to be in the early going of this book being out, quite a talking point. I mean, there are people who love that. They love that I did that because there are probably 20 or 25 players on this list who are connected to a number. That's roughly where they'd be ranked anyway, even on a computer ranking, but they are connected to a number. And some people love that. They see, I was trying for something. There's a little bit of art in that. And I think it was also for me an effort to say, hey, look, I love these rankings and I'm happy to argue with you all day about them if you want. But let's be honest, this is an impossible task. It's impossible to tell me that this person is 23 all time and this person is 47 all time. Come on, they're all so great. It's so subjective. So that was my thing. There are others who really hate it and really feel like that what they wanted was an actual hardcore ranking they could argue about. So the most controversial of them all, I think you probably caught, is Joe DiMaggio. And Joe DiMaggio in my book is number 56. And that is lower than Joe DiMaggio is on probably almost any one of these kinds of lists. It's lower than he was in my actual sort of mindset, but I think he's number 56. It's the 56 game hitting streak. It's when I see the number 56, I think Joe DiMaggio. I felt like, to me, it was a greater honor to give Joe DiMaggio number 56, that great number that I think belongs to him, than it would have been ranking him somewhere in the 30s or wherever he might have been. Even, my feeling was that was where I wanted Joe DiMaggio. Again, some people love that. They're like, this is great. I'll never forget that Joe DiMaggio is number 56 in your book. And others are furious. And, I have one guy say, I'm not buying the book just because of that. I'm like, all right, I get it. I totally get it. But yeah, I really wanted these numbers. I kind of in my mind had it that these numbers are more art than science. And so I wanted it to be a blend of those two things.
I wonder if that love-hate sentiment has anything to do with left brain, right brain. You talk about people who like, well, if you take this guy's WAR, this guy had a higher WAR than this guy, so he should be higher up on the list.
Right.
One of the things you write is part of baseball is getting bothered about stuff that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that was just one of the few. I find this to be a very, again, for lack of a better word, literate book.
Thank you.
Your style of writing is much more to my liking, let's say, than a straight fact, a book about the Astros cheating in the World Series year or things like that. So this is, it must be difficult to mix the two, the admiration you feel versus your job as a writer reporter.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I feel like my admiration and love of the game is at the heart of what I'm doing. But I also feel like, as you have seen, I mean, nobody in this book is perfect, right? There's not a single perfect person in this book, and everybody in this book had failings. Everybody in this book had, nobody hit 1,000 and nobody won every game they pitched. And for me, whether I'm writing about somebody who, somebody like Jackie Robinson, who was obviously this iconic figure in not just baseball history, but American history, or I'm writing about Curt Schilling, who is a guy that's not in the Hall of Fame in large part because he's a loudmouth and can't keep his mouth shut. I wanted to bring the same energy and love to both of those essays, but they're obviously very different. And I'm not going to write about Curt Schilling and not talk about, the fact that he did make a lot of enemies along the way. but he was also an unbelievably great pitcher. And so yeah, I don't feel like it's that they're in conflict. I mean, I feel like I can bring that level of enthusiasm and love for the sport while still telling hard stories, which I think this book is filled with.
Well, I think that's a very honest approach, and it's to be appreciated. You talk about, you have saints and sinners in the book. You have people like Christy Mathewson and Walter Johnson, and your chapter on Barry Bonds is like the most even-handed, because you have critics of Bonds, admirers of Bonds, and
Yeah.
you go back and forth with that. Same thing, not so much in the same way, but you write about Roger Clemens and his devils. And the thing that just struck me about Clemens is the mention of the father.
Yeah.
And you write a lot about fathers and sons. And you have some fathers like Mickey Mantle's fathers, who is very hard pushing. It reminds me of the Fear Strikes Out, the movie,
Right.
uh, where the father figure is always, you can do better. Why can't you do better? Uh, and you write about your own father in this book.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about that.
Well, you're 100% right. Fathers and sons is a major. I was surprised as I was writing it how often it came up, and there are mothers in this book too, and all of that. But you have so many players who, you have your Mickey Mantles and your George Bretts and your Carlton Fisks, who have hard driving fathers. I don't know if it's fair to put Fisk's father in the same category, because he was hard, but he was not pushing him like the way that Jack Brett and Mantle did. And then you have these wonderfully, beautifully supportive fathers, Warren Spahn's father and Chipper Jones' father, and you have Mike Trout's father, who I write at length about in this book. I mean, it's really amazing. So for me, of course, what I always come back to is my own father, and my own father is much more in the spirit of these supportive fathers. He would go out and play catch with me, and I obviously had no talent, but I cherish those moments as somebody who never got past little league baseball. I still cherish those moments in a way that I know that those players did. So I mean, I think we can all relate to that, no matter what level we may have reached, whether we became high school players or college players or never played at all. I think we can all relate to that relationship and what it means. So it does come up again and again and again in this book.
And when you write about your father, it's in the chapter on Brooks Robinson, and how
Yeah.
he's always encouraging you to be like Brooks Robinson, which he seems like one of the good guys in the book.
Amazing guy. And yeah, I mean, Brooks Robinson was my father's favorite player. And so that, and I, one of my favorite parts of this book is I felt the freedom at all times to do that. I mean, the Burt Blyleven chapter is about me collecting baseball cards. The Brooks Robinson chapter is about my father. I really felt like wherever the mind went on this book, that's where I wanted the stories to go. And obviously I don't feel like I'm intruding on these stories. I feel like all of it leads back to the player and what made them great and what makes baseball great and all of those things. But it's been good. It's really good to talk to you at some length about this, Ron, because you put out a book like this, and a lot of people, you're going to go on a lot of talk radio shows and a lot of this, and what they're going to want to talk about is the rankings, right? And that's great. And they want to argue, why did you put this guy number one? Why did you put this guy number two? Why didn't Tony Gwynn hire? Whatever the case may be. And that's great. And I love talking about it. And that's all wonderful. But in talking with you, what's really I'm able to say and makes me feel really good is I think this is hopefully an amazing reading experience for people, because it was an amazing writing experience for me. And it is 100 really certainly lovingly crafted essays about players, about baseball, about every element of the game, in my view. And so this is my story. I mean, I look at it, it's about 100 layers, not about me, but really this is my story and why I love baseball. I hope that comes across. I really do.
Oh, I really think it does. Uh, I hate to change the topic a little bit because this is such a nice conversation, but getting
Sure.
back to the nuts and bolts of the book,
Yes.
one of the things I also liked about it, there's no table of contents.
Yes.
And in that way, it's very hard to, I mean, of course, you can flip to the back and see who's number
Of
one,
course.
but you make them work for it.
Yeah, and that is a purposeful choice. It's funny. I've been asked about it quite a few times. Some people really don't like it that there's no table of contents. It was an absolute requirement, not just by me, but also by my publisher, that there was going to be no table of contents. And and the reason is exactly what you said. I mean, I want people to go into the book, but I also felt like that was a real way to sort of not devalue the rankings, because that's what they're for. I mean, they're there to be found. But if you just put it in the rankings and it's all on the table of contents, it's like, okay, why did this guy put him number 63? Why did he put this guy number 54? This guy should have been higher. And you can look at it in one sort of swoop and make all kinds of judgments. And that's not the point for me, right? And so, look, if you go to number 95 is Tony Gwynn. And if you see that on a list and you're a Tony Gwynn fan, as almost all of us are, you'll say, oh my gosh, this guy hates Tony Gwynn. I mean, 95, you can't tell me there are 94 players better than Tony Gwynn. And okay, I mean, you can certainly say that. If you read the Tony Gwynn piece, which is, I love Tony Gwynn, and I know that comes across. If you read the piece, you realize the ranking is not what matters when it comes to Tony Gwynn. It's the story of his life and the story of his greatness and so on. So I felt like, in one small way, not putting in a table of contents, just read the book. It's
Exactly.
really an effort to get you to read the book.
Oh, you make them do the work. I agree. And this book is rather thick.
It
It
is
is
rather
over
thick.
800 pages.
That's right.
And some books I read and I figure, well, this is going on a little bit long. This one could have been longer for me. It could have
Well,
been.
thank you.
When you were doing research, did you go back to any other books that did this kind of rating?
Oh, I did. I did look at all the books that I could find. There was Maury Allen did a countdown.
We're going to talk about that in
There
a
you
minute.
go. Baseball's 100.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. Which was very interesting and good. Donald Honig did a countdown, I think, with maybe with John Thorne. I can't remember. There's a countdown. Sporting News did one. Bill James has done several countdowns. So yes, I did look at all of those books. I have a very big spreadsheet which has all of the hundreds that I could find. ESPN's is in there, so I could see where everybody was ranked on all of them. And I wouldn't say that I relied on the rankings so much, but I wanted to see, like, okay, well, if I'm leaving somebody out, where did somebody else rank them? I did want to know, the rankings. So yes, I did definitely. I was more than just a little bit aware of those.
Now, you mentioned Maury Allen's book, which I have here. It's Baseball's 100, a personal ranking
Yes.
of the best baseball players in history. He does have a table of contents, and even though I read this book a long time ago, I cheated and just looked at the table of contents. And just to read very briefly from his introduction, the numbers in baseball are important. The 300 average is as significant a mark of excellence today as it was 50 years ago. So is a pitcher's 20 games won. But did he do it with a dead ball or a live ball? Did he do it in a big ballpark or a small one? Did he do it with night games or only day games? Did he do it under the hot lights of television or in the calm, quiet days in St. Louis? Now, this book was published 40 years ago,
Yeah.
1981. So I was curious to see. I mean, 40 years is like two generations of ball players.
Exactly right.
And obviously, you have people like a Mike Trout, a Kurt Schilling, who, if they were born when this book came out, they weren't on the baseball radar. And I just want to see which of the older, and this is always going to happen from now until the end of baseball, until the end of writing about baseball, is that new great players who come along are going to push out some of the older ones who are just as deserving.
Sure.
We have these new guys. And in a way, I found it kind of sad But again, this is the baseball 100. It's not I think Derek Gentile wrote a book, The Baseball 1,000, in which he
Yeah,
ranks, it's a much more statistics driven thing. And it
sure.
doesn't go into any kind of depth like these books do, certainly not yours. And I just found it interesting to see what someone like Maury Allen, who spent a lifetime covering baseball, would write, and you're spending your lifetime writing about baseball and sports. And I just, if people can get a hold of this just as a comparison, I would highly recommend it. So, are you working on anything now, or are you just taking a break for a while?
No, I don't take breaks. I am definitely working on stuff. So I have my own in my own newsletter at joeposnanski.com. And on there, I am actually counting down the 101 greatest football players. So I immediately jump to something even more ridiculous and challenging than baseball, because there's no real way to compare football players. But I love it because, again, my goal is to talk about why I love football. My goal is to have this tell the story of why I think the game is great in its own way. So so I'm doing that. I'm doing a bunch of other things. I have a podcast with my friend Michael Schur called the Poscast. So yeah, no, I'm busy. I'm definitely still busy.
That's not the Michael Schur, the television person, is it?
Yes,
From
that
The
is Michael
Office?
Schur, The Office,
Oh
Parks and
my
Rec,
goodness.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Yeah, though.
Fantastic. I should have brought this up before. Uh, you wrote a lot of this book during the pandemic,
Yeah.
which did that have any kind of influence on what you were writing?
Um, I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. But um, most of these essays were done by the time the pandemic really hit. In fact, almost all of them were done. I did work on the last few, and they're probably longer because of the pandemic. Um, what I thought was interesting was not so much what my writing did during the pandemic, but what the reading did. After the pandemic, this list seemed to take on a whole new life. People, there was no sports going on. I mean, it was kind of the only game in town in a lot of ways, and it was already well into it. I think we did the last 30 maybe players after the pandemic, something like that, 25 or 30 players. And so we were already in the meat of it, and it had already developed a pretty good following, but then it really took off. And I've heard from so many people who said that reading it in The Athletic in its original form was real comfort to them in those early days. I mean, this was actually in March and April and May of the pandemic, so it was really truly the early days of the pandemic. So probably, I mean, I can't imagine. There's nothing in my life or your life or any of our lives that was not pretty deeply affected by the pandemic and not leaving home and all of that.
What about the practical side? Since I guess in a way you're a little more fortunate the book came out this year than last year because things are opening up a little bit. Because I know that there are a lot of authors who banded together to form the Pandemic Baseball Book Club,
Right.
who were not able to go out, were not able to promote their books in person, were not able to do signings or attend events. Is that opening up a little bit?
It is opening up a little bit for sure. I just did an event in Kansas City, and it was the first event that they had done in 19 months. So I am doing an event at the Baseball Hall of Fame next weekend. So, but it's still pretty tight. I mean, most stuff is virtual still, and it's still tough to do things. But the great thing for me is this book is it's mind blowing to me how well this book is done in the early going. I mean, it's looking like a best selling book, and it's a 900-page book about baseball. So so I'm thrilled with that, and completely blown away by the early returns and the reviews and the way that it's been jumping off the shelves. I don't know that I can explain it, but I feel good about it.
Well, let's talk just a little bit before I let you go about the timing of the publication. Most baseball books seem to come out at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
This one comes out at the end of the season. Now, my thought was that we're coming to the end of the season. Unless you have a team, your team is in the playoffs, you're kind of winding down. This is the kind of book that you can spend your time reading. I mean, each chapter stands alone. You don't, it's not sequential. You don't have to read it like you would another nonfiction book. What went into the planning of the timing of the release?
Well, I mean, most of that really was done by the publisher, not me. I mean, but what they said made perfect sense to me. I mean, I think we're going into the playoffs. So baseball is in the air, but exactly what you're saying, it's in the air, but there are, an increasing number of baseball fans who do not have a team directly in. They still have some baseball. I think this is an off-season kind of book anyway. I mean, it's like something that you might want to pick up in January and sort of feel warm about baseball as we count down to 30 whatever days left till pitchers and catchers. And being bluntly honest, and it's a gift book. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's a big, beautiful book. They did an amazing job with the way it looks. And I think they're seeing it under people's Christmas trees, we hope. So I mean, I think that was part of the timing as well.
And we've been talking with Joe Posnanski, author of the new book, The Baseball 100, published by Avid Reader Press. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and stay safe.
Thanks, Ron.